Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course, and this module is on disk management. I'm James Messer, and I'll be your host through this module where we discuss CompTIA Exam 220-601, Section 3.3, and 602, Section 3.3, which are very similar. They have us identify the fundamentals of using operating system, especially the concepts and procedures for creating, viewing, managing disks, directories, and files. And where we're going to focus on this module is on disk management. We're going to talk about formatting files and disks. We're going to talk about checking disks, defragmenting disks, backing up and restore, and disk cleanup. Some of these things we covered in some earlier modules. Some of them are brand new, but what we're going to do is collapse them all into this single module so you'll know what the CompTIA exam is expecting you to know regarding disk management. Before we get started with this module, I want to give you a warning that some of the things that we do in this module will break your system if you run them on your hard drive, on your production system. So make sure that you know that as we go through these commands and you see some of the things that we're doing, first make sure you really understand what we're doing there, and make sure that you understand that typing in some of these things in a registry or changing some of these settings at the command line may delete information from your hard drive. Sometimes it's not even obvious that it's deleting it. So always, always, always have a backup. One of the watchwords of this training course is that you have a way to go back to a previous version. Did I mention that you should have a backup? And thirdly, make sure that you have a backup. Very important as we go through this disk management module. Now, the idea is that we want to be able to manage disks. And one of the first places we start, indeed some of the things that we've been doing in previous modules, all came from the disk management screen. Now, disk management is a nice centralized place in the Microsoft Management Console that allows us to manage new disks, to format disks, to do partitioning, and you probably remember us using that in a previous module. Let's see how it looks. From our Windows desktop, we get to the disk management in a couple of different ways. We can right mouse click on My Computer and choose Manage. That's the really quick way to do it. And that will bring us up to our computer management console. You'll notice in here there are a number of different items you can choose from. The one that we're interested in seeing for this module is the one called Disk Management. And you can see it brings up a view of what disks I have in my system, the file system that's running on them, the current status of those systems, and you start to get it graphically. How are the disks in this particular system configured? So a very quick way to do that. Now, this was a quick shortcut way to get to the disk management screen, but you can also get to this from the Start menu under the Settings Control panel. We can then go into our Administrative Tools and choose our Computer Management option. And that brings us back up to exactly the same screen. From there, of course, we can go to our disk management screen. Now, this disk management screen is great because we can go here and really do a lot of different things. The idea is that this is one central place you can go to that not only your disk management information is in, but a lot of the other things that you'll need to manage your system on a day-to-day basis. Before you can do anything with a disk that you've put in your system, whether it's a floppy disk or whether it's a hard drive that you've just installed, you have to put some type of file system on that particular disk. It is completely empty and it's not even able to have anything written to it before you format it. So this format capability and this format command allows you to prepare a disk for use to put the file system on this disk. This is creating, if you can think of it as a master index for this disk, really getting it ready for data to be written, and now data can be written to the disk, and now the formatting has allowed us to keep track of where we're writing things, keep track of what's really stored on that particular disk. An important thing to keep in mind is when we run the format command, this is removing data that was there previously. It may be removing just the index, or it may be deleting over the entire disk, as it does if you're formatting a floppy disk. This will delete data. In some occasions, some circumstances, you can run third-party programs that will run an undelete of the data. What they essentially do is go through that index and go through what's on your drive and recreate what files happen to be there, and then you can recreate the index. This isn't always the case. Depending on how you're formatting and depending on what you're formatting, you may not be able to back up and figure out what was there previously because the format command may be actually removing the data from the disk. So keep that in mind. There's a graphical way to format a disk in the Windows Explorer and the disk management view that we just used. You can also do this at the command line. One of the graphical ways of formatting a disk is from the computer management view or your Windows Explorer. For instance, I have a new disk that I added to this system that doesn't even have a partition on it yet. So I'm going to add a partition with my partition wizard. I'm going to create a primary partition. We'll just do the whole thing and we'll call it drive E. Now notice one of the options during this partitioning session is to format it with an NTFS partition. You could also format it with FAT or FAT32. These are the file types that we discussed in a previous module. And then you can choose a particular allocation unit size. These are the size of the blocks on that disk, and then the volume label that you'd like to put there. That's one way to do it during the partitioning process, but if you already have the disk partitioned already and you would like to go back and format it right now, you can right mouse click on that, and one of the options is to format the disk. And here we have exactly the same options we had at the end of the partitioning session. We can create a volume name. We'll call it volume X. And we'll use NTFS as our file system. We'll use the default allocation unit size. And I'm going to perform a quick format. And if I click OK, it says it's going to erase everything on this volume. Again, as we mentioned before, a lot of the commands here are very non-forgiving. It's going to format and erase everything. It's nice that Windows tells us that that's what's going to happen. We click OK. And now this volume X has been created with NTFS and it's healthy. So just like that, we formatted the volume and now we're able to write information to it. Now you could do exactly the same thing from the command line. Let's start a command line session with start run, and I'm going to type CMD, and there's my command line prompt. Now I know that that was my drive E, and the command that we would use for formatting is typing in format. And I'm going to hit enter, and you can see that, well, it doesn't explain what you should be doing. I can't just format. What do you want to do? If I do a /?, we'll get a lot of help about the format command. In fact, it's bigger than this screen will hold, so I'm going to back up just a little bit. The format command, you can see, is pretty extensive. As you noticed in the graphical view, we had all these pull-down menus. We had all these checkboxes that we could choose. Well, exactly the same settings are here at the command line. We can format the command line, give it a volume label, do a quick format, do NTFS only. A lot of different things are here. And the way we do it is format and then the name of the drive. So if I needed to format E:, I just simply type in format E:. It says that the type of the file system is NTFS. Enter the current volume label. And this is a way that at the command line, we're guaranteeing that we know exactly what we're trying to format, because obviously we're going to be removing data when we do this. We called it volume X, and it's going to check and say, all right, you're going to completely nuke what's on this disk. Are you ready to go? Proceed with the format. We'll say yes. We'll put a new volume label on it, volume Y, and we'll hit enter, and it says the format is complete. So it's exactly the same process at the command line, a little bit more typing, but in the end, it does exactly the same thing. If we go back and look at our computer management screen, you will see, in fact, that volume X has changed to volume Y. It's still our NTFS. We didn't change anything with the file format, but now we've reformatted. If there was data that was on the drive, it's gone now. So that format command, as I mentioned, removes everything on the drive, but as you can see, it's very easy to format your drive and initialize it so that you can then store files there. Let's say that we've been using a drive for a while. We've got some files on it. Perhaps it's the drive that we use in our system that we boot up from every day. And we're concerned about the drive. We're not sure it's working the way that it should be, or we'd like to make sure that problems that we're having aren't related to something on the drive, either the logical layout of the drive or the physical sectors of the drive itself. Fortunately, Windows includes this command called check disk, which checks the file system integrity, makes sure that our index matches what's on the disk itself, and we can also check for physical disk problems. Disks themselves, being a physical medium, can have sections of it that become difficult to read or write to over time. So we can have this check disk program go through each one of those sectors and do that. There's a graphical version of this in your Windows front end, and there's also a command line version of this called chkdsk, check disk. Let's look at both of those. If you go into the properties of any disk, you're going to see a number of options available. Let's do this on our volume Y that we just created. We'll right mouse click and choose properties. And one of the options in the properties is tools. This is a wealth of information here because we can do error checking, defragmentation, and backup, a number of the things that we're going to be talking about today. What we'd like to do is that disk check, and this is under your error checking where this option will check the volume for errors. So let's check now and see what happens. One of the options is that we can automatically fix errors when they occur, or we can have Windows prompt us for what to do, and we can scan and attempt recovery of bad sectors. I'm going to choose that one because that goes down to the physical level of the drive and performs a check for us. We'll click Start, and you can see that Windows goes through sets a set of phases as it checks the index, checks the files, goes to the drive itself, and obviously the checking of bad sectors, the length of time will depend on how big your drive is, how many number of sectors are on that disk. And very quickly, in this case, this is a very small volume, Windows has come back and said the disk check is complete. And because we got no errors whatsoever, we can feel good that drive E is a good place to store our data, or if there's data there currently or we're having problems, volume E is really not the problem that we're dealing with. This drive E is not the issue we need to worry about. Now, this same command can be done at the command line. Let's run that. Do again a start run CMD and hit enter. And chkdsk is the command. When we type chkdsk by itself, it doesn't fix anything. It goes into a read-only mode. So this is very similar to where we didn't check that we wanted anything changed here. This is going through and just looking at indexes on the disk, looking at where the files are, looking at the logical format of what we're doing, and verifying that all of these things are where they should be. Now we look at security descriptors. It's now completed that process, and checking our journals. It verified our journal and finally tells us everything's fine with that. Now there's also another number of parameters we can put on here. I'll do a check disk and a /, and you can see we can fix errors on the disk. We can display cleanup messages. We can look at dismounting different volumes, doing a vigorous check of the index entries. There are a number of different things we can do here. So without even using third-party products or tools, we've got a lot of things that we could do right now to verify if this drive is working the way we would expect and if we feel comfortable with having data stored on this disk. As you use disks over time, one of the things you'll notice is they seem to get a little bit slower, especially if you work with very large files. You start sharing a lot of music, you start sharing a lot of video, you do editing, there's a lot of disk accesses in and out. You may notice that it's not as quick to retrieve files as it used to be. Nothing changed with the drive or the computer, but what you may be finding is that the files that are stored on the drive get split up into tinier pieces and are stored in different spots along the drive. Now, this is normal in the Windows, the DOS, the NTFS type file systems, that it might store a single file in many different places. The problem is that when it needs to retrieve the file, it has to go back to all of those different places and bring the file back and put it back together for you. And because there's a physical drive that has to go out and do those things, this takes some time. Well, to speed things up, one of the things that you can do is defragment your drive. This takes all of those files that were all over the place, brings all of those pieces of the file back together and puts them in a single place. It makes the file what we call contiguous, which means it's all in one single location from beginning to end. Now that makes it very efficient. When your drive is spinning and that head is there, it doesn't now have to look all over the drive to find that file. It can simply read that file all in one place in one fell swoop. So this is really going to improve the read and write time. You may be surprised, depending on how fragmented your drive is, how quick now your drive will be after you do this. This is generally something that is non-destructive. In fact, it's very common to do this as normal maintenance of the drive. And when someone brings their system in and wants to get a tune-up, this is one of the things that's done. There's a graphical version of this in the drive properties, and there's a command line version called defrag. In Windows, again, anytime you see a drive letter, you can right mouse click on it and choose Properties. And what we're going to do is go back to our Tools tab and the option here to defragment now. This is very graphical. It brings up a disk defragmenter, and you can see I've got a couple of disks here. I have nothing really on my drive E, but I'm going to analyze my drive C so you can see exactly what's there. This is a time-consuming process. As it goes through the drive, it looks at the files that are there, and Windows will tell you if you need to defragment this, what percentage of fragmentation happens to be on your system. And our drive C, I rarely use. It's for demonstration purposes, and it says that, well, right now you don't need to defragment the drive. You can see behind the scenes, it has created these colors that shows us whether files are fragmented, whether they're contiguous, whether they're files that cannot move because they're system files, or whether there's free space on that drive. I'm going to click defragment, even though it says that I don't need to defragment. I'm going to click it anyway so you can see the process. It goes through first that analysis of what's going on, and then it's going to start moving files around. It's going to pull files from one place and put them to another. And you can start to see some of these lines. It's hard to see on this screen, but some of the lines start to move around. The idea is that all of these red lines we'd like to get rid of, and we'd like to see as much blue as possible. Can't really change the green. Those are unmovable system files, but you'll notice that a number of things are changing on the screen. You're watching it move back and forth. As I mentioned, this is a time-consuming process. So this is normally something you set it, and then you go do something else while it begins the defragmentation process. This is a relatively small disk. It's a 4 gig disk with a lot of information on it. You can imagine some of the larger size disks. This could take some time, but it's relatively simple. Now that we've set it, it's going to go through this process and finish what it's doing. Let's fast forward ahead and see what happens once it's done. Now that the defragmentation process is done, Windows tells us that it's complete. There are some files on this volume that could not be defragmented. Check your defragmentation report for a list of these files. And you can see the report here shows exactly what happened during this time frame. It even lists out for us some folders and information that's there, some that are in use, things that didn't defragment. We can print this, we can save it out, and we can do other things with it. That's useful. If we go away and we come back, it'd be nice to see what happened while we were gone. And there were a few changes to the fragmentation on this drive. Not everything was done, but you can start to see how this might speed things up. Very easy to do. Now, this can also be done at the command line. Let's now go back to our command line. I'll do a start run and a CMD. And defrag is the command. I'll do it with a /? So you can see the different options available. You specify the volume or the drive letter that you're going to use, whether you want to analyze it only. So this is what we were doing originally, is we did a defrag of drive C, and we did a -A just to look at how we were defragmenting and what it could do for us. And it tells us that this 4 gig, there's 15% free and 7% is fragmented. It says you do not need to defragment this volume. Very similar to the information we got on the Windows front end, but if you'd like to run this as a batch process or you'd like to do it from the command line, that option's certainly available for you. Something I mention often during this process is that you need to have a backup. Have you backed up yet? Fortunately, Windows includes a backup process within the operating system, so you don't need to buy new software. You don't have to go out and get third-party tools for this. You can back up and restore files directly from the graphical front end or from the command line. You can even create bootable recovery disks that will then take all of your system. It'll back up every single thing on your machine, and if you ever need to restore every single file on there, you can boot from a single disk and it will do that for you. Let's look at the backup process not only at the Windows front end, but also at the command line. You can start the backup program a number of different ways. If we right mouse click on any drive letter and go to the properties, we can go to that tools tab again, and that final option on that screen is the backup option. This brings up our backup or restore wizard. You can also open this up if we go to our start menu under our programs, accessories. Under our system tools, there's an option there to back up. So a few different ways to get to the backup program. There's a wizard that pops open automatically that can step you through the process. And if we click next, it says whether you'd like to back up or restore the files on your system. And there are a number of backup options. You can back up everything in your My Documents folder. You can back up everyone's My Documents folder. You can back up everything on this computer, and it will even create a system recovery disk. Or you could say, let me decide what I'd like to back up. And then you get to choose what files, what directories you would like to back up on the system. So very easy to do this. If you've got one of those external USB drives, if you've got a CD-ROM or DVD read-write that you can send information to and have it write directly to that optical media, this backup restore wizard will do that for you. You don't need any extra software to make that happen. We can run this exact same program from the command line. Let me cancel out of that and run start. And run, type CMD. And the program to do this is called NT Backup. What this really does is just launch this NT Graphical Backup program. There's no command line equivalent for this, probably because there's so many different options you can set for this. If you need command line functionality of backup, a third-party program may be more appropriate, but for most people, this graphical front end will walk you through and allow you to do whatever you might need to do to back up just a few files or to back up your entire system. This final disk management tool is something that I use a lot, disk cleanup. I am constantly storing huge amounts of temporary files, using up a lot of my drive space with these videos that I do editing to. So I'd like it occasionally just to clean out all of this temporary file space that I've got. Disk Cleanup is a program that's inside of Windows that will do this for you. And not just clean up temporary files, but also a lot of other things you may not even think about. This is also available in the drive properties of what we have, or we can launch it from the command line with this command clean mgr. Disk Cleanup, very easy to find this. We can right mouse click and go to our properties on any drive, and right here next to the picture of the pie that shows us what's on our drive, there's an option for Disk Cleanup. I'm going to choose this on my C drive so you get a feel for some of the things that are available to be cleaned up. The first thing the cleanup process will do is see how much space is on your disk, see how much is being used by other things, and you can see there's downloaded program files, there's temporary internet files, there's setup log files, there's a number of temporary files. I've got over 13 megabytes of temporary files, and I've got a lot of older files on my system. It's checked and looked at files that I haven't accessed in a while. And what you can do on NTFS is compress those to save space. Some files compress very, very well and very tightly. Some don't compress well at all. But it's nice that Windows goes through and looks at how often you use those files, because the process of decompressing them and compressing them again, if you're moving them or changing them, does use a little bit of overhead. So you usually don't do this with your newer files. It's nice that Windows will hunt those down for you automatically. Once we have created and found those files, there's a number of options that we can do. We can either remove different components, we can do a system restore, we can get rid of a lot of different things. The process, once we've selected it, you just click OK, and Windows says, you sure you want to do this? Because we're going to delete files. Yes, we do. So it's going to clean up the unnecessary files on our machine, and now we've cleaned up some extra space for ourselves. So if you don't want to go in your hard drive and figure out where are all the temporary files, where are my log files stored, what files have I not used in a while, so that I can choose which ones that I'd like to compress, we can just have the Windows Disk Cleanup program do that for us automatically. As I mentioned, we can also do this from the command line, so I can go to my Start menu and type Run and type clean mgr. And what that does is bring up a drive front end that says, what drive do you want to clean up? C and E is what we have on this system. And what it does is launch that same graphical front end for us, but we can launch it from that command line view. So if you aren't quite sure how you start that up, where you find the process to start it up, clean mgr will start it up from the command line for you. In review, we've looked at a lot of pieces of disk management, how to format disks, how we should check the disks once we formatted them and got data on them, and also how to defragment, maybe speed things up a bit in our operating system. We also stepped through the Windows built-in backup and restore functionality, and finally we saw how we could clean up the disk to save some space, clean up some temporary files, and make more room for some other things that we might be doing. If you'd like to watch any of our other A+ videos, participate in our message boards, and much more, you can visit our website, freeaplus.com.